Welcome to Lesson 7. My name's Jack Gately, owner of Jack Gately Real Estate and your licensed instructor for the real estate school. I am also the owner of the real estate school. This lesson is about contracts. You know, when it comes to contracts, oh my gosh, this is so important. A lot of people say, hey, we use the same forms all the time. It's all the same. It's not all the same. And of course, when something goes bad with a deal, then we always revert and say, hey, what's in the contract? Was the washer and dryer in the contract or not? So what's on paper matters. Words matter and contracts matter. So remember, as we head into this lesson, that for the most part, you are not an attorney and you cannot be conducting what we call the unlicensed practice of law. The unlicensed practice of law, that is a no-no, can't do that. Excuse me. Nor may you dissuade or discourage somebody from seeking legal advice. Ooh, that sounds like a good test question there, doesn't it? In fact, I always recommend that you encourage your client to seek legal advice. Technically, it says you can't discourage, but I'd recommend that you encourage your clients to seek legal advice. Typically, it will go better for you and for everyone involved. And that's just word to the wise there. I'll let you know, but you most certainly cannot discourage anyone. If someone says, hey, do I need a lawyer for this? The answer should always be yes, that would be a good idea. Technically, the answer would be you can't discourage someone, but I always like to encourage them. So point made. Let's move on with contracts. Now, there are all sorts of contracts that you're going to be involved with as a real estate agent. There are offers, listing agreements, leases, the P&S agreement, extensions to contracts. Gosh, there are all sorts of things. These are the meat of what we're doing here. Remember, our job basically is to take two parties that are unbeknownst to each other, for the most part, far apart from each other, and step by step by step, bring them closer to an agreement, bring them closer to the table, bring them closer to a deal. And that's the art of this business, and most of that is achieved, well, the vast majority of it is achieved by contracts. And contracts are agreements between two parties to usually do something, but a contract can also be between two parties. We'll just draw two people here. As you know, I can't spell, and as you know, I can't draw. So this will be fun. A contract is usually between two people, in which case they agree to do something or even not to do something. So it can be a contract that you won't do something, but usually it's a contract to do something. But keep in mind, it could be a contract that would, I just took that person's smile off. There we go, they're smiling again. Technically, it's a contract usually to do, or what we call forbear, which means not to do. Put that in parentheses, not to do. So that's what a contract is. It's an agreement between usually two parties. Now, in this case here, most of your agreements are going to be express agreements. Oops, sorry about that. Most of your agreements are going to be express or implied. These are very important terms for you to master for the exam and for real life. Typically, an express contract is one what is expressed in words. In words, it can be the written word, or the spoken word, but it's going to be expressed in words. And for the most part, whatever is expressed in words is the complete agreement of the parties. Whereas an implied contract may not be written, not written, or not spoken. So For instance, if you walk into a diner and you sit down at the counter and you pick up the menu and you order something and you say something like, I'll have 2 poached eggs on toast, they go make it for you. They present it to you for you to eat for breakfast. You never said 2 poached eggs on toast and I agree to pay you $5 or whatever it happens to be. Though that kind of precision never occurred with an applied contract, but yet the contract still existed because there was an unspoken agreement. I guess that's the kind of way to think about it. So all of our real estate contracts, however, are going to be express contracts for the most part, and I'm going to strongly recommend that you go with the express written contract. Ooh, that sounds like familiar language that you've heard before. By express written contract, put an I on that there. Now, there are real estate agreements, contracts, that you can go with the spoken word. For instance, one of them would be, or the only one actually I can think off the top of my head, is the tenancy at will. Tenancy at will, that's renting month to month. This is allowable to be a spoken word contract. However, in speaking to the landlords that I work with, I always recommend that even if you have a tenancy at will, that you still use the written form for that. Years ago, it used to be a 1-pager form. Now it's grown. It's probably up to like 3 pages for a standard tenancy at will, but it's a written contract. And this is the only contract under what we call the statute of frauds. The statute of frauds. It sounds like I need a little sip of water. I'm going to go grab that for me here just so that I can speak smoothly to you. But under the statute of frauds, all your contracts for real estate should be in writing. Having said that, their one exception would be the tenancy at will example. So, not only can contracts be implied or expressed, they also can be bilateral and unilateral. Bilateral and unilateral. So a bilateral contract, and I think you probably already figured this one out, a bilateral contract is a transaction. When something's going one way, like money, or as the fancy word is, consideration. Remember that one from before, of course. And something else is going the other way, like title. This would be a bilateral contract. But, just like when you buy a candy bar at a store, let me get that sip of water. If you put a candy bar at the countertop, in order to leave legally with the candy bar, you're going to give them some money, and they're going to let you leave with the candy bar. The flip side to that, of course, would be a unilateral contract. A unilateral contract. Let's put that up there for you. Unilateral. There we go. Unilateral. And with a unilateral contract, one person promises something, and there's not necessarily the return action or the inverse action. One person promises something and the other person gets to think about it. They control market timing, or whether even the deal will ever even occur. So for instance, if you said that, hey, or I said to my son, Will, if you take out the trash, I'll give you $5. And if he does take out the trash, then I do owe him $5. But basically, he has the option. Ooh, that sounds like where we're headed right now. He has the option to take out the trash or not. Now, that's not actually how it works at my house, just to let you know. But that would be a good example of an option, which is a unilateral contract in which the option or in the option E are two different people. Which one's who? That's right. The optionee is the one who received the option. This would be my son. Not that he's going to really have an option to take out the trash. He's going to take out the trash. But he received the option to do something, and he can act upon it or not under this scenario, which, again, does not actually happen on my house. So unilateral contract, the one party gets to think about whether or not they actually want to perform, as opposed to a bilateral contract when everyone has to perform. So this question of performance is called executory. Executory, let's get that up there for you, versus executed. Executed. Well, I gotta tell you, with real estate agents, I misspelled that. I can't believe it again. I'm going a little bit too fast there for you. Executed, there you go. With real estate agents, I find a huge number of real estate agents that misuse this term. It's okay, it's not the end of the world, but with an executory contract versus an executed contract, in an executory contract situation, it has to do with the extent, you can almost see that written right into the word there, that the performance occurs. So, for instance, with an executory contract, that might be like a lease, for instance. You might have a lease signing, and at the signing, the tenant signs everything, plus they forward the consideration money, and then the landlord hasn't done anything, right? They haven't performed yet. They don't perform until the day of move-in, until move-in day. So this would be an example of an executory contract. Executed is when both sides do finally perform. Finally perform. There are different concepts there. Executed is when everyone has performed. Executory is usually when one party has and the other party has yet to. So the next big question that we face with contracts is it legal, or more precisely, the more better term to use, more better, as my daughter would say, what's the legal effect, or is it legally in effect, I guess is the best way to think about it. So we have contracts which are binding. Those are valid contracts. That kind of speaks for itself. If a contract is binding on the parties, we can add in here, then it is valid. It is valid. And the next one here is void. There's no contract at all. This could be for instance, illegal activity, something along those lines. Totally. Also, something would be a void, would be a contract with a minor, for instance. No contract was ever deemed to exist, or I should say, no longer exists. Then there's the interesting one of voidable. It's enforceable at the option of one party. Now, this is the one that we kind of head down in real estate world, so to speak, because sometimes some of your contracts, because somebody missed a deadline, is going to be, you're going to hear this phrase out there in the marketplace with your other agents. It's going to be, quote, out of contract. And you never want to be out of contract. Out of contract basically means that one party in the transaction failed to do something in time, like, for instance, provide the mortgage commitment letter, or get the home inspected on time, or sign the extension, or whatever the case may be. So they're out of contract. You never want to be out of contract. And nowadays, when we have signatures that for the most part are done not exclusively, but by how should I say this, time stamped and date stamped, nowadays we do know if someone failed to sign something even 2 or 3 minutes late. So when we're out of contract, that's not a good thing. It does occur, and therefore one of the parties, the party that did perform, can get out of it. Now, most of the time, in most of your real estate transactions, if someone doesn't sign the P&S extension until the next morning, That's really not going to be a problem in many cases, but you never want to be out of contract if you can avoid it. So let's try not to go down that route. And of course, unenforceable is going to be something that a court will not enforce. There could be an element of time involved here. For instance, it's just not going to be something that is going to be enforceable. There could be something, a change of the law could have occurred, for instance, something that the court will not enforce. So these are the 4 stages of contracts: valid, binding on all the parties; void, no contract at all; voidable, one party could get out of it if they wanted to. They don't always take that route, but they could. And enforceable, for any number of different reasons, a court would say, hey, we're not going to enforce this contract. So of those 4 states, what we really want to dive into is whether or not it's valid. That's the most important one. Well, they're all important, but we really need to know if something's going to be valid. So we ask ourselves 4 questions, and there's standards, basically the requirements to make it valid. First off, are the parties capable? Are the parties capable of entering into a contract? Is there a minor involved? If there's a minor involved, then they're not capable in most states, if they're under 18, of entering into a contract. You can also have people who are, how should we say this, not in charge of their full mental capacity. That would be a definite consideration. You might come across those types of folks that are suffering from that condition during your professional life. So keep in mind that you want to step back and make sure they have legal counsel before you ask anyone to enter into a contract that might not be fully in charge of their mental faculties. And there are some folks that are not allowed to purchase real estate. So who are those folks? Well, in some states, not Massachusetts to my knowledge, but in some states there are some convicted felons who are not allowed to purchase real estate. So those are some examples of capable parties, no minors. Everyone has to have full capacity, mental capacity, and they cannot be precluded from owning real estate, although most people are. And certainly in Massachusetts, I believe we do not have that rule. So there must also be an offer and an acceptance. You know, it's not enough just to put your house on the market. By the way, this sounds like a good test question, and it's an important item for real life too. Just because you put your house on the market, like, you know, you put up a sign, you put it on the MLS, that type of thing, that in and of itself is not an offer. That's not an offer. It's only an invitation to receive offers. Hey, you could send us an offer if you want, but it's not an offer in and of itself. In order to sell your house, you have to have received an offer, and then you have to have accepted the offer. Nowadays, we do everything by express contract, but in other businesses, back in the day, we used to do things by handshake, or even if I just watched a movie recently where you've probably seen it with Brad Pitt in Moneyball, and usually they're trading a player, Brad Pitt, who represented Billy Beane in the movie, from the Oakland Athletics. He would trade a player, he would give them an offer, and the other team would accept the offer. Now, there was probably some agreement paperwork that had to be done later on, but essence of that is that you had a meeting of the minds, And that's the, I really love this part of being a real estate broker, is when you are on the phone with the other agent or the other broker in the deal, and you're going through the list of things that need to be negotiated, and finally get to the end of your list, and you look up from your list and you say, I think we've covered everything. Have we covered everything on your end? We have. Are you happy? Are we happy? Yes, everyone's happy. Fantastic. It seems like we have a deal. I'll send you over the paperwork. But for now, it seems as if we have a meeting of the minds. And it's kind of like when you're like, yes, you've gotten the answer you want, as they say in Moneyball, hang up the phone. And I love that part of my job when we have a meeting of the minds, either by email or phone, where everything's basically crossed off the list, and we have a I guess the other way you could describe it is an agreement in spirit, that type of thing. Basically, the technical phrase is a meeting of the minds. So the next thing, in order for a contract to be valid, it's got to be for some lawful product or service. So, well, you can make your own joke at home about that one, but it's got to be for a lawful product or service. And then there's got to be some consideration exchange, some consideration. And most importantly, that type of consideration is got to be something that's going to be satisfactory to the to the seller. I want to talk a little bit more about offers and acceptance. Let's do that. Let's clear this board here. Talk a little bit about offer and acceptance. And when we're talking about acceptance, I want to make sure that we understand that there has to be a reality of consent. What does that mean? It means in order to actually consent and accept something, there has to be the absence of the following things. These cannot exist. These cannot be present. And what can't be present, Jack? Well, there can't be misrepresentation. Can't be misrepresentation. Can't have any of that. That's a no-no. You can't have fraud. You can't have undue influence. Ooh, that's an important one. Can't have that at all. And the last one is you can't have duress. So in regards to the reality of consent, it's basically the absence of these four things. Misrepresentation, clearly that would be easy. That's like the withholding of a material fact. Fraud is a more overt act where you're purposely trying to be unfair or deceptive. Undue influence, that's an interesting one. That would be like a third-party person out here somehow influencing the two-party. These are the people that are doing the transaction. And then off to the side is a third party who's putting a lot of pressure on this person to do the deal. Do the deal. It's going to be a good deal for you. And then secretly, this person is maybe getting paid or somehow getting a benefit out of the whole situation. That's called undue influence. This one is more like the Godfather movie. Either your signature or your brains are going to be on the contract, your choice. So this has to be absent, obviously, in order to have real consent. So much of what you're going to be doing as a real estate agent revolves around offers and counter offers. And, you know, when we talk about the single family home market, for instance, typically you're going to be, I might take these in slightly out of order, but typically you're going to be sending in an offer and it's going to have a time where it expires. In the market that I work in, usually that's 48 hours, although I've seen them as short as 12 hours and 24 hours, definitely seen that out there. But 48 hours where I work, and every different parts of the state, different markets are going to be different. It's usually 48 hours where I work, but nonetheless, there has to be some, if there isn't a particular time mentioned, it still has to be a reasonable amount of time that the contract is viable for. So if it's not mentioned the exact time limit, there will be some limit to it, what the court deems to be reasonable. So again, I'll say that again. If the offer does not include a deadline by which to respond, the court will say that it will expire at some reasonable time. So when we're talking about offers, let's get back to how long it's good for. It's also only good for as long as the time limit that we mentioned, and until it could be rejected or withdrawn, I should say. That's a better phrase. Withdrawn from the offer by the offeror. So it can be withdrawn up until the time of acceptance. Time of acceptance. So if you send in an offer and it has a 48-hour window on it, and on the next morning, hour 24 comes along, and they fell in love with some other house that just came on the market that morning, it's been on the market for 0 days. If the offer has not yet been accepted, then no problem. You can ring up, or I'd prefer that you do it in writing, and withdraw the offer. That's fine. You don't have to wait out the 48 hours. As long as it's not yet been accepted, then you can revoke it or withdraw it at any time. Important question here is, what happens if, heaven forbid, someone passes away while the offer is pending? Well, that is a very, very good question. If it was accepted prior to the time of death, then the contract is valid. Valid, in which case your estate would be on the hook for performing on the contract. However, if it happened after the time of death, then there would be no contract and it would be void. So the very important question in regards to this. Where we really get a lot of questions is when it comes to counter offers. It's very, very important to know, and when we have this rule, that when we send in an offer, the soon as we get a counter offer, and by counter offer, it doesn't always have to be on price. It could be on timing, for instance, of when we want to perform the contract. But as soon as a counter offer comes back this way, the original offer is dead, and the new counter offer becomes basically a new offer. And the obligations of the offer or under the original offer no longer exist. So this is a very important rule, and I find that a lot of agents don't know it, and or they want to forget about it when the time comes. So, for instance, if you sent in an offer on Monday that expired Wednesday at 5 p.m., and on Tuesday you had a little back and forth and you were negotiating whatever, and then the sellers don't like how that goes, and you withdraw, your buyers withdraw from the deal. Buyers withdraw sometime on Tuesday. Your seller can't say, hey, remember that contract? Well, remember that offer, rather, that you said is good till 5? Yeah, we're going to accept that now. Oh, no. That is a no-no. Can't do that. As soon as it's counter-offered, then the original obligations under the original offer are dead. That's a very important rule that you should know when you're out there in the wild as a real estate agent, so to speak. So remember that these laws are all backed up by literally this contract law that we're talking about, literally centuries of contract law. Much of it goes back to English common law. Some of it goes back to France. I mean, this is not a Napoleonic Code. This is not something that just kind of sprung out of nowhere. So these are very long-term established, many cases of courts thinking about these rules, practice in real life, and so these rules are well established as to how these contracts work, and who when they're valid, when they're not valid, when a counteroffer is in dead. This is not new field of law. Okay, so let's move on to what we know as the parole evidence rule. Parole evidence rule. Oh gosh, you didn't think you were taking law school today, did you? Well, you're not, because remember, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not teaching law school. I'm teaching real estate class. But you probably should know what the parole evidence rule is. And that basically means that you cannot add on prior agreements that bind the parties if you already have an express contract in place. Unless, and it can become very difficult, unless for some reason these prior agreements help solve some type of muddy situation with the wording. For instance, I think that's not a legal term, so that's actually why I used it. But a parole evidence rule is going to be say, hey, you cannot add on these prior agreements. That's a no-no. Let's get the red pen when we say no-no, right? You cannot do that. That's a no-no. And to bind the parties, you can use these prior agreements if it's for somehow provide some type of clarification to both parties. So let's talk a little bit about, now that we know about valid contracts and invalid contracts, I want to talk a little bit about when things go wrong, or what we call breach. But before we get to breach, I just want to quickly mention that contracts can be assigned to other parties. So sometimes, especially in like commercial real estate, if a commercial company is making an offer to buy real estate, they might say Acme Inc. and or it's assigns, which basically means this is who's making the offer. But if our offer is accepted, most likely we're going to create a limited liability company, probably called, like usually in the name of the street address of what they're buying. So they'll make 123 Maple Street LLC. And what they'll do is after their offer is accepted, they'll assign their portion of the contract to 123 Maple Street LLC, basically to buy the property with that entity. In this case, Acme is still on the hook for performing on the contract. The other type of assigning would be a sublet. So we don't typically use that here in Massachusetts. The standard lease, that's not the phrase I want to use, but the lease most people use prohibit sublets, as is common here in Massachusetts, but in New York City they are much more common. Nonetheless, it's transferring the liability of the contract to another party, but you yourself, the original party, is still on the hook. That is in contrast to novation, where novation is basically taking the contract and replacing in full a completely new party, and basically it's in tantamount to a completely new contract, actually. In which case, if we were to do novation, Acme, for instance, would no longer be on the hook for performing. So this is important, is that with the concept of novation, the old party is completely resolved and released. The old party is released, and the new party takes their place. So that's a very important concept. Now let's get on to breach. Breach of contract. What do we do when someone breaches the contract? Well, we have first off, we have rescission. Rescission is a way to change your mind, basically, and it does not apply to first mortgages, does not apply to your first mortgage. There we go. And that's one way, if in Massachusetts, if you buy like a kitchen and you're down at the kitchen store and you sign your name and you put down your deposit, if you come back within, I think the rule is 3 business days, you can cancel your order, get your check back, and that's how the law is written in Massachusetts. And the other ways, of course, if something goes wrong, is called damages. And there's basically 2 types of damages. One, in which case the total monetary damage is unknown, in which case the plaintiff is going to put a price tag on the damage. They're going to kind of come up with how much it cost. And the other one or how much because of the breach, how much they were damaged, I would say. And the other one is liquidated damages. And the best way to think about it in this case is that liquidated damages are predetermined. So, for instance, if you were doing a commercial contract, you were changing a relatively fallow piece of land into a strip mall with a drive-through restaurant in it. The buyer oftentimes would be performing all sorts of environmental studies, traffic counts, all that type of thing. And so there'd be a significant dollar figure that went along with that in good faith that they were going to actually purchase the property. If for some reason the seller was not going to be able to go forward with the contract in the future, not going to close, then the damages would be predetermined. That would be called liquidated damages that the seller would be on the hook for, predefined by the contract itself. Now, in other cases, you can also sue. You can sue for what we call specific performance. Well, that's going to trip up my tongue today, isn't it? Specific performance. Now, with real estate has been identified by the courts as being especially singular, and therefore very often, instead of just awarding damages a dollar figure, sometimes you can actually get the court to go with specific performance, because what's been deemed over time is that if a seller won't sell to you when they should sell to you, for instance, just paying off the disappointed buyer is not enough, because that could never replace the uniqueness of actually owning the real estate. And therefore, courts, especially in real estate cases, don't go with damages. They actually direct specific performance. This is a court-ordered legal remedy, legal remedy, often requiring you to actually go forward with the transaction. And then, of course, you can also seek an injunction, which I think most people know. That's a court-ordered relief for you to stop doing something. That's fairly easy. I think you all know what those are. Now, inbuilt into these clauses are going to be, like the liquidated damages clause, that could be predetermined in a P&S, especially a more sophisticated commercial transaction. Also, there could be contingency clauses. What are contingency clauses, Jack? Well, we have two common contingency clauses when we're looking at residential real estate. The first one is the home inspection contingency clause. And the second one, I'm going to leave a little bit of gap here. The second one is going to be the mortgage contingency clause. These are both clauses in the offer. And in a home inspection contingency clause, basically allows the buyer mostly 7 to 10 days to inspect the property. And they can, the way the standard or the most commonly used home inspection contingency clause is written, the buyer can back out at their sole discretion. So really, they don't even need to give a reason. For any reason at all, they can back out if they're not happy with the home inspection, as long as they do so inside or before the 10-day window expires. Once the 10-day window expires, they can't take advantage of this clause. The mortgage contingency clause works like this. If you use the common language, you have to apply by a certain date, and you must cooperate with your lender. If you don't get financed after that, if you don't get the money, if they're like, oh man, we're not going to do this loan, maybe the appraisal comes in too low, for instance. If they're not going to do the loan, then you can back out by a certain date, as long as you applied on time and you cooperated. So there are some higher standard for mortgage contingency clauses, but it is fairly easy to apply. and it is fairly easy to cooperate. So most people that want to back out of their mortgage, back out of their deal because they didn't get financed, are able to do it. And most people want to back out of their their deal because they didn't like the home inspection, are able to do it, because in essence most of these contracts are written in a way that it's much more difficult to get the seller to back out, or much more difficult for the seller to back out, very easy for the buyer to back out. Let me say that again. It's very easy for the buyer to back out because of these clauses that we just mentioned, but much tougher for the seller to back out. Therefore, the buyer is protected so that while they're doing their home inspection, while they're going to get their financing and that type of thing, they are protected so that, heaven forbid, some other buyer doesn't come along with a higher price, for instance. The seller can't kick one buyer to the curb and accept the offer for the higher price if they're already in an offer, if they've already accepted an offer. So that's a really important one. There's a famous case. If we have time, maybe when we're talking in the live portion of the webinar, we'll get to that. By the way, I'm always here. Either me or some other licensed real estate instructor is always here. So if you have any questions during the video, don't hesitate to pause the video, raise your hand using the webinar software, and we'll answer your question right away. So just want to let you know I am here. But then there's the live webinar part where we're actually talking and interacting more of a different level. So I just want to let you know, don't hesitate to ask if you have any questions while I'm rambling on here, as I'm doing right now for you. So let's get into the different types of listing agreements. Okay, so one of the most important contracts that you're going to be doing as a real estate professional is a listing agreement. And my wish for you is that you do a lot of listing agreements, because listings are where it's at. By far, getting a listing requires a listing agreement, which is a contract between the seller, the owner, and the agency. Keep in mind that it's not between you, the agent, and we'll talk about that later in a different lesson, but technically it's between the broker and or the agency and the seller, and not you, the agent, from a technical point of view. So there are, and I'm going to draw you a little diagram to show you how all these work. There are basically 4 types of listing agreement. The one that you want to get is an exclusive right to sell, or in the case of a property that's going to be leased, an exclusive right to lease. And I'll do up a little diagram for you, as I said. The other one is exclusive agency. This sounds good. Exclusive. Oh, it must be good. Yeah, that's not so good. We'll give you a diagram of that in a second. Entry only. Entry only, that's a newer thing that allows you to post it on the MLS for a flat fee. We have those out there. And open. We're going to give you a diagram to describe that. In fact, let's flip to that board and let me write up a nice diagram here to kind of get you an idea of what these 4 types of listings exist. So generally speaking, if you have, in order to have any type of listing, you need someone who wants to sell. And of course, the seller contacts the agent. The agent works with an agency, and they do a contract, right? Contract. Then the agency goes out and markets the property. And part of marketing the property is going to do the photos and the videos, and they're going to post it to the MLS, and they're going to advertise and that type of thing. Video and pictures, pics, and that type of thing. So they're going to advertise. So they're going to spit out all this information, and somewhere down here will be a buyer that sees it. And usually, not always, but usually the buyer is then going to contact their agent, which we'll call the buyer agent. And then the buyer agent is going to be obliged to contact the seller agent in order to actually contact the seller for a showing. In other words, all the action under an exclusive right to sell goes through the agent and the agency. This is what's called an exclusive right to sell, and that's what you want. And it also means that for the period during which the contract is valid, we're going to get paid. We like to get paid, of course, right? And in the seller, if the seller finds the buyer on their own, they have to send that prospect through the agent themselves. So that's a completely different than that other thing I mentioned a minute ago called exclusive agency. Exclusive agency. I spelled that wrong, sorry. Exclusive agency, you know what I meant. Exclusive agency, when you have exclusive agency, there we go. The seller can find the buyer on their own over here. Maybe they just happen to stroll on by and then can cut the agent out. Oh, we don't want that. So hardly anybody that I know, at least, does exclusive agency because the seller can find the buyer on their own and doesn't have to pay the commission. So lots of people try to avoid that type of listing agreement. Not something you want. So these are the two big ones out there, the exclusive right to sell and exclusive agency. Almost everybody tries to get an exclusive right to sell, which means that no matter what happens, even if they find their brother to buy the place, they still have to pay you a commission for the period of the listing period. So let's go on and talk about the other types that I mentioned. That other one I mentioned was interesting. Entry only. Entry only. Let's see, we get a yellow up here for you. There we go. Entry only. In markets that are extremely hot, we'll write that in red for you. It's hot. It's hot outside. We have a hot market. Sellers are happy. Here's the sun is shining down on the seller. It's a hot market. In an extremely hot market, guess what? You might not be needed as much. That's right. Sometimes in an extremely hot market, it's good enough for the seller to hire a real estate agent to put the property and enter it only into the MLS, in which case the agent is providing limited services. And nowadays the going rate for this type of thing is like $400 plus or minus, in which case, let me just say that again, the seller is going to hire a real estate agent to put the listing into the MLS. And that's it. Everything else, all the transactional details, the photos, the videos, the nice fluffy description about the property, all of that is on the seller to come up with. The seller handles all the marketing steps, all the negotiation, all the paperwork. Basically, they're taking you out of the loop, which I guess is okay because you're doing less, you're also getting paid less, but you're also getting paid a certain $400 as opposed to a potential commission. These are not that popular nowadays, but they do exist. You will see them from time to time. Beware, because oftentimes the seller who's selling their own property through the entry-only system might be the first time they've ever sold a property or basically acted as their own real estate agent. So you might have to hold their hand a little bit during the process. In other words, you might have to work harder to get this type of deal done. And sometimes you're going to actually get paid less because sometimes the percentage that they're going to be offering is a little bit less. Oftentimes they're doing this because they don't have as much equity in the deal. And if they're going to be selling it for entry only, which means that they're going to be paying on a on a $500,000 house only $400,000 to list it, and maybe they might be offering a 2% commission, which would be $10,000 on a $500,000 house. Then they just sold their house for $10,400, as opposed to the exclusive right to sell. Then most likely they're going to be paying, given prevailing rates, which are not fixed by any means possible. They can totally vary. But commonly it would, I did that math wrong. Commonly let me just get that right for you. 0.025. Actually, this number here should be 0.025. you get the point though. This should be 12.5, this should be 12.5, and this should be 12.5, and this should be 12.5, so therefore this should be 25, and this should be 12.4. Sorry about that. You get the point. In this particular case, there's a huge savings if you can do entry only. The problem is your photos, your negotiation skills, all of that might be significantly not as good as your average agent, and therefore, while you are saving some money on the commission, the question is, could you have made that up by marketing it properly with somebody who was experienced? Is like a $12,000 difference here. So this is a thing, entry only, where the seller could put the property, and there are maybe 2, 3, 4 agencies out there that this is what they specialize in taking entry only listings. You're not going to see them every day, but they do exist. And the last one that I want to talk about is open listings. Open listings. Now, I don't know of many open listing situations, but I do know of one, and that's the Boston rental market, the Boston rental market, in which landlords, back in the day, landlords literally used to walk their listings along. Like, so if you had a Beacon Hill, couple of apartment buildings on Beacon Hill, you'd stroll down Charles Street with your listings on Thursday or Friday, and you'd hand deliver them to the listing agencies on Charles Street. Well, nowadays there's a computer program, of course, that does this for you, but basically landlords decide to give their listings to multiple agencies at the same time, and then of course agencies have agents, and of course they're out there looking for renters in this particular case, and as soon as the renter is found, the agent submits the deal to the landlord, and there's no co-broke in these deals for the most part. It's a beautiful thing, and that's why sometimes renting apartments, especially in a big city like Boston, can be very profitable, because you don't have to co-broke the deal. Multiple agencies have the same listings, so everyone can advertise. So yes, I picked up some apartment listings the other day, but unfortunately so did a bunch of other people, and basically it's a race. It's a race to find the first qualified candidate. So whoever can go out there and post as much Craigslist ads or whatever way you generate these leads, it's just a race. That's all there is to it. And whoever can bring back the qualified applicant with the good credit and the money down and everything signed is going to get the deal. And so in this particular system, usually landlords, as a convention, usually make a decision within 24 hours. Can be a little bit longer from time to time, but usually 24 hours. There are some other agreements between real estate agents and the members of the public that we should discuss. And the first one is a net listing, which here in Massachusetts is illegal. You cannot do this in Massachusetts. It's a no-no. You can't do it. And basically, it's a conflict of interest between you, the agent, and the seller. And if we go back, if you've already taken the lesson in which we discuss fiduciary responsibilities, remember the fiduciary responsibility to be loyal. And you also always have to place your client first, and you in the distant second. So in this particular case, a net listing is wrong. So what is a net listing? Well, a net listing is selling something and keeping the overage as your profit margin. But remember, for a real estate transaction, you don't actually own the property. You need to work on a commission basis, on a percentage basis. So in a net listing, the seller might come to you and say, hey, Jack, I want to sell the property and walk away with $100,000. And you might say, great. And then the seller might say, hey, anything over $100,000, whatever that is, that's going to be your commission. And you might think to yourself, okay, so let's say we sell the house for $500,000. Now we owed, or the seller owed $300,000 on the deal, and of course the seller wants to make a $100,000 profit. That means we still have $100,000. Remember, the seller wanted to make that $100,000. That was the one. They said they wanted to walk away from the closing table, so the old lender got paid off, and the seller got their $100,000. That means there's $100,000 for the agent. That sounds great, doesn't it? Yeah. No, you can't do that. That's a no-no. You cannot do that. That is a no-no in Massachusetts. Now, there are some states that allow it, but you can't sell it in Massachusetts and take the overage, even though that's kind of like the American way. Of course, if you owned a convenience store and you bought a box of candy bars and you wanted to sell them, if you bought them for 99 cents and you sold them for $1.99, of course, that's the American way, right? That's great. But you can't do that with real estate. Now, the other type of agreement that could be in existence between a client and a, notice how I'm not saying seller, between a client and an agency is a representation agreement to represent them. And this usually means buyers. Sometimes buyers will lock themselves into an agreement, in which case they agree to buy through the agency for a certain amount of time. Let's say like 3 to 6 months, for instance. And they agree that as part of this process that the agency will get 2.5%, for instance, or whatever number. This can be any particular number. And there's nothing fixed. Commission rates are not fixed. Well, that sounds like a test question to me. Although there are fairly common commission rates, but they're not standardized in any way. There's not some secret board that sets them. But in a representation agreement, the buyer would enter into that with the agency for a period of time. They'd agree to pay this much if they found a property they liked, if they found something they liked. And they agreed to buy it through that agency. So this protects the agency, really, so that, think about it. If you're going out with people to show them houses weekend after weekend after weekend, and then the next weekend's call comes around and they say to you, hey, would you like to show us houses again? And you're like, oh my God, not these people again. And then, of course, you're like, well, I can't because it's my child's high school graduation. And they said, no problem. We'll go out again with the next weekend. You go have a good time. And then, of course, what they do, the second they hang up the phone with you, they call some other agent, and then they fall in love with the house that day. And all the 5 Saturdays that you spent with them go to waste because you didn't have them in an exclusive representation agreement. And when you call them on Monday, what do they say to you? They say, Jack, you are a great agent, but... And you know what that means. We found a house this weekend. Thanks for helping us out. Thanks for all your 5 Saturdays, but we're all set. Yeah, that's not too happy to hear. Nobody likes to hear that. So therefore, once that happens to you a couple of times, at your agency, your broker may have a policy that in order to work with buyers, every agency is going to be different. In order to work with buyers, they might require you to go forward with an exclusive right to represent agreement. You really have to play it by ear depending upon what your agency has to say about these particular types of things. So in regards to that, let's move on to our next topic, which is leases, because they are one of your more common types of contracts that you're going to be not drafting, because we don't draft leases. That's for attorneys, but what that will certainly be involved with. So let's talk about types of leases. So with leases, there are several types of leases. For the exam, you really only need to know these 5. Leasing is there's much more than 5 options, and there can be hybrids of these in times. But a gross lease, like the office I have here, basically means that I pay a fixed payment, and then the landlord is on the hook for all the variable type of things that happen. So if it snows a lot this year, that's on the landlord to plow that. I don't have anything to do with that. That's on the landlord. If I turn the heat on in February and leave the window open, tough luck for him. I don't have to worry about that because I don't pay if I leave the window, this is an open window. I realized that you couldn't really see that it was open because it's black on both sides. If you leave the window open, if I blast the air conditioning in the summertime, too bad. I pay my fixed monthly rent, and that's all I have to worry about. So some landlords do that in properties that are not separately metered, for instance, or in maybe not the prime office space or prime retail space. There is the place for that in the marketplace. I have an office like that, actually. It's a gross lease. Send in my 1 monthly payment every month, and that's it. I'm done. And if things go up or things go down, I don't benefit from that, nor do I really have to worry about that either. And in this case, I might pay actually a teeny bit more per month for the certainty that my fixed cost will be constant. Now, a net lease is a little bit different. There are usually 3 nets, hence that phrase triple net. One of them is going to be utilities. So you pay for your own utilities. The other one that's very common is common area maintenance, CAM. So this is to pay for the snow guy, the cleaning people in the hallways, to cut the grass, all that type of thing. Common area maintenance. Usually you pay it as a percentage of your square footage on any particular net. And the last net is taxes. Taxes. You have to pay, again, a percentage. If it's a 1,000 square foot office in a 10,000 square foot building, you're going to pay 10% of the tax bill. And as it goes up, you pay more. So this is called a net lease. I'm sure you've heard this phrase, triple net, or sometimes you might see just a sign that says NNN, triple net. Those are N's, by the way. Triple net lease, and that's what it means. It's a significant difference. Basically, in concept, it shifts the variable cost of ownership over to the tenant. Now, a graduated lease is going to be a lease that is similar to a gross lease, except it's going to have what we call an escalator clause in it. An escalator clause. I'm going to draw a little picture of this for you. A perfect example of that would be if this was I'll draw you a chart, actually. There we go. In a shopping mall kiosk for your average mall that doing all the business during Christmas time, as soon as January comes, their monthly rent is going to go way down, and then in the summertime it's going to be the lowest. And then as we head into back to school and then back into December, they're going to go back up again. So that's a graduated lease, a graduated lease. A percentage lease is a percentage of the net sales. The net sales. Sometimes a shopping plaza might work like this. So I think I'll just draw another diagram just so that you can kind of get a sense of this. In a shopping plaza, there could be an anchor store here. There could be some smaller stores here. In this shopping plaza, the anchor store might have a percentage lease, while these stores here are operating on a triple net lease situation, or some hybrid thereof. In other words, what the landlord is saying, what the developer is saying is, put your big store here. We'll call it Walmart. Put your big store here, and I'm going to give you a break on the square footage. So usually on a percentage lease, you're going to pay less because basically it's a volume discount. You're renting one big hunk of the property all at once. And then these people here, these stores here, basically survive on the traffic that is driven to this store. And if you don't see what you want at this store, then you go to GameStop, for instance. So if this is GameStop. Notice how GameStop is smaller and they're going to rent smaller space. Highly likely they're going to be in a triple net lease, and they may also have to be in a triple net percentage lease, but I don't want to get you too confused. But nonetheless, in this particular case, the big store gets a break on their square footage in exchange. Hey, if we do well, you, the developer, will do well. You'll share in our success. And if we don't have success, then you'll share the pain too. In the meantime, the developer is, once the Walmart steps in, or any use any other store from prior past. How about if for those of us who are older, Caldor, once Caldor locates there, or even Sears, there's not too many of those. Once the big anchor store arrives, then the landlord can rent these other places out a lot easier, because GameStop is not going to rent here, or Radio Shack, or Orange Julius. They're not going to step up here unless they know that there's traffic coming in to the main anchor store to begin with. So that's a very important lease. And the last one that I wanted to cover is a ground lease. A ground lease. A ground lease is usually for fast food. Where not exclusively, but oftentimes where the building is basically, it's an afterthought. The building's an afterthought. A lot of people think, the building has everything to do with the value. No, the only thing that matters is the location. Because Americans want, when they get off the highway, they want to stop at what we call the first QSR, quick service restaurant. And that is because McDonald's a long time ago figured out two things. One, we are lazy, and two, we have to pee. And yeah, I know, I just said that. And therefore the location, even though everyone knows Wendy's is better, yes it is, everyone knows Wendy's is better, the location is about everything. So actually, that was a pretty good Wendy's logo that I just threw out there. Everything is tied up in the location. And even if you moved it like a quarter of a mile or even an eighth of a mile, that would have everything to do with the detriment of the location. And therefore, the building is actually held as collateral against the lease itself. Hey, let's just hammer home two more concepts before we wrap up this video on contracts. We hinted at this one earlier. I just want to make sure that I describe it for you correctly, because we didn't give it a full description. But in an option, the option or is the seller, and the option E is the possible buyer. The possible buyer. Because in an option, the possible buyer can let the clock run out. In other words, they don't have to buy it. If they get an option for 6 months in order to do some due diligence, and oftentimes options are set up in a way that allows the buyer to, lack of a better phrase, buy some time in order to look into whether or not the property might be suitable for the purpose they have in mind. For instance, to put in a strip mall with the drive-through restaurant, for instance, window. The potential buyer, the possible buyer, might seek an option. That takes the property off the market for the period of the option and allows the option E to do their due diligence, to look into the situation and to see, for instance, to do some preliminary investigation. Will the town allow us to put a drive-through in there? What's the neighborhood opposition going to be? What's the traffic count going to be? Is there any 21E concerns, environmental concerns? And so the option E is going to use that time. And any time during this, for instance, 6-month window that we talked about, the option E can go back to the option or and say, yep, let's buy the property, and they can go forward from there to consummate the deal. That's a little bit different than the right of first refusal. Right of first refusal. Right of first refusal. Let's write that out for you. Now, I think the most easiest way we can describe a right of first refusal is going to be, I'll draw a diagram for you. in a situation where you have, let's get a blue color for you, waterfront. So here's the water down here, and you have a house up here. A big house. Maybe it's owned by a billionaire. And there's another house down here that might be owned by a millionaire. And so billionaire talks to millionaire and says, I'd like to buy your house. And millionaire says, no, I'm enjoying my house. And then millionaire thinks it over and says, okay, well, maybe I can grant to the billionaire, for a fee, of course, a generous fee in this particular example, a right of first refusal. In which case, should I decide sometime in the future. So in this example, the millionaire gets to set the timing. The timing is set by the person who grants the right of first refusal. And, you know, this millionaire here, they may never sell their property, in which case, that's the way it goes. They may never sell their property to the billionaire, but the billionaire gets the first crack at it. Another type of example of this would be like a restaurant that, you know, a lot of restaurants, not every restaurant, but a lot of restaurants, everything to do with their success is wrapped up in that singular location. I know a bakeries, for instance, all sorts of. I'm thinking of one particular bakery in the south end, actually, of Boston at the moment, where it's at the corner, so it kind of dominates the little intersection there. And even if that bakery was 1 or 2 or 3 doors down, it wouldn't be the same thing. It wouldn't have the same sidewalk seating and that type of thing. It just wouldn't be as popular. It wouldn't be the community gathering spot that it is. And so consequently, if you have a facility like that, or a restaurant like that, you're going to want to have a right of first refusal built right into your lease. So this is something, oops, sorry about that. Let's put that back for you. So this is something that sometimes you see built right into the lease. In which case you can back out of it. We'll write that better. Sorry for the slippage there. This might be built right into the lease so that should the person who owns the building, the entity that owned the building during the term of the lease, decide to sell the property, the restaurant can get the first crack at preserving their location. And that, of course, is going to be something that they're going to negotiate as part of the lease when it first starts. So, but oftentimes you see that in a lot of commercial leases. Not everybody needs it. For instance, my office, doesn't really matter whether I teach real estate school in this office here or 2 or 3 buildings behind, because it's not really a destination place like a corner restaurant would be, but these things do exist. So options and right of first refusal, be careful not to confuse those. Remember, in the right of first refusal, it's the millionaire that always controls the timing. Well, it's been great to be with you for lesson number 3. My name is Jack Gately. I'm the owner of the Real Estate School and of Jack Gately Real Estate. You can always interject with any type of question during the video. Please don't hesitate to do so. Remember, I'm always here, and or another licensed real estate instructor is always here, even when you're watching the videos. And thank you for watching lesson 7. Looking forward to seeing you on another lesson.